If you see these Christmas carolers, don't open the door. They're the Christmas carolers from hell. My life was so perfect yesterday. My wife and I were getting ready to celebrate our first Christmas as husband and wife in our first home that we purchased just this fall. My wife had decorated the tree, and I had put Christmas lights on the roof. We drank our eggnog and cider together while watching classic Christmas movies and talked about how next year we would hopefully have a baby to get presents for. Our happiness has now been shattered, thanks to the Christmas carolers from hell. Before we begin though, if you're interested in this type of video, make sure to smash the like button, subscribe to our channel, and click the notification bell. It all happened last night, December 23rd, 2020. My beautiful wife was in our kitchen baking some sugar cookies for our neighbors while I wrapped presents for our nieces and nephews. We listened to cliché Christmas music, smiling and laughing as I screwed up the wrapping and she burned the cookies. A knock on the door caught us off guard. My wife and I looked at each other confused. It was about 9:30 p.m., a little late for visitors. Perhaps it was another plate of baked goods from one of our generous neighbors. My wife opened the door and we found 5 people, 3 female and 2 male, all dressed identically. They wore plaid red shirts with a green shawl and a red scarf. The men had bow ties that matched the shirts, and all 5 of them wore green top hats and white gloves. Something about the way they smiled was just, well, off-putting. They looked almost fake, like those wax figures you'd see in museums. They were all smiling, which didn't necessarily seem like a bad thing, but they were smiling just a little too big. It seemed unnatural. "Merry Christmas," one of the women said enthusiastically. "We'd like to sing you a couple of Christmas carols." I felt a bit uneasy about this. It was getting pretty late and I had just had a very weird feeling about these people. I was about to politely decline, but my wife beat me to the punch. "Sure, we'd love to hear," she said, with a smile on her face. She was much better at being kind to strangers than I was. 1, 2, 3, the woman said, with that ridiculous smile still glued on her face. Immediately after 3, the 5 people started singing an excellent rendition of "We Wish You a Merry Christmas" in unison. Honestly, the quality was amazing. Too amazing. Although there were only 5 people, it sounded like there was a 15-person choir at our doorstep. My wife and I listened, and pressed until they finished. "Bravo," my wife said cheerfully. "Thank you so much for singing to us." "Oh, we actually have one more song we'd like to sing to you," the Christmas caroler said. Only something about the way she said this was incredibly creepy. Instead of her cheerful tone before, she spoke in a creepy monotone voice. That's when I noticed their eyes. They were changing. All 5 of them were undergoing the same eyeball transformation in unison. Their pupils started dilating, and they didn't stop until the black covered the entire eyes, including the whites. "Babe," I said, "close the door." Only she didn't close the door. She stood there, frozen, staring at these demented carolers. I looked back at them to see that their mouths were all gaping open now, and their jaws had started to grow. Their chins lowered in unison, and their jaws stretched in an unhuman way. I could hear the sounds of cracks and pops coming from their jaws as if the bones were breaking. Their chins stopped after the jaws had stretched some 8 inches or more, leaving these black-eyed carolers looking more terrifying than anything I had ever seen before. I took a few steps back and again told my wife to shut the door. Again, she didn't move. That's when the horrifying sound started. It started quietly, in a high-pitched noise, but quickly rose in volume. Instinctively, I put my hands to my ears and the noise grew louder. Even with my ears plugged, the sound was horrifying and terribly painful. "Close the door," I yelled at my wife, but she just stood there as if hypnotized by the Christmas carolers from hell. The volume of the high-pitched sound now felt like there was a jet engine blasting on our doorstep. I looked at my wife to see blood coming from her ears. It started as a trickle, but in a matter of seconds escalated to a steady flow. Panicked, I hurried towards my wife. I removed my hand from my left ear to close the door. The sound was horribly painful, and my ear instantly felt like the worst pain I had ever felt in my life. I felt a pop and blood started trickling from my ear down the side of my face. Those wide-mouthed, black-eyed, screaming monsters still stood there like statues, emitting this supersonic noise. I slammed the door shut, pulling my unmoving wife away from the door, still keeping my right hand over my ear. I pulled her downstairs as the windows of the front house shattered. Even in the basement behind closed doors, it was still painfully loud. After another 30 seconds or so, it stopped abruptly. I looked down at my beloved bride to see that her eyes were open, but she didn't move or speak a word. Blood still flowed freely from her ears, soaking into her white knitted sweater. I immediately called 911, but quickly realized I could hear nothing from my bleeding left ear. I tried to describe the operator what happened, but all I could manage was that my wife was hurt and her ears were bleeding. As the paramedics loaded her onto the stretcher, she remained completely catatonic, her eyes wide open, as if frozen in that horrifying moment. It's the morning of Christmas Eve now. We're still here in the hospital, and we'll be here for some time. I've spoken with several police, doctors, and even a weird British man in a black suit. But it doesn't seem like the authorities really believe me. The doctors are absolutely baffled, and are struggling to come up with any plausible explanation to how we could have sustained these injuries. Apparently, they think I've just gone crazy from the trauma. I've been diagnosed with a moderate concussion, and am now completely deaf in my left ear. Physically, I'm relatively okay, but emotionally, I'm absolutely wrecked. My wife is in a far worse condition than I. Both of her ears are so far beyond damage that it will be impossible for her to ever hear again. If she ever even wakes up, that is. My wife slipped into a coma shortly after we arrived at the hospital. I'm sitting by her hospital bed trying to make sense of what the hell just happened to us. She has suffered a severe subdural hemorrhage, which means that her brain started bleeding. They've done emergency surgery to stop the bleeding, and had to remove a part of her skull to alleviate the pressure. The doctors can't say yet if she'll have permanent brain damage or not. To make matters worse, the doctors told me that she suffered a miscarriage as well. I didn't even know she was pregnant yet. I think she may have been waiting to surprise me for Christmas. I'm telling you this to warn you about these Christmas carolers. I don't know what the hell they are, but they are not human. Whatever you do, if you see 5 matching Christmas carolers standing on your porch, do not open your door, lest you should suffer the same horrible fate as my wife. They are the Christmas carolers from hell.